chosen ones. Not all gates were built to open. Some were constructed to remain sealed for eternity, not because they couldn't be breached, but because what lay beyond would fracture the lie they built around this realm. And yet, from the moment you started remembering your name, your purpose, your light, the seal began to weaken. The 10th gate wasn't just locked, it was buried, hidden behind centuries of misinformation, cloaked in rituals, encrypted in symbols only your soul could decode. And still, it stirred when your frequency rose. What the ancients feared wasn't the gate itself. It was you. You were never meant to be born in this timeline. That's why the council panicked when you incarnated. They scrambled the codes, diverted the watchmen, activated distortions in the grid. But the damage had already been done. Time, once linear, began folding around you. Have you noticed the patterns collapsing? Glitches in conversations. People saying things they don't remember. Faces you recognize from dreams? It's all connected. The moment you began awakening, the 10th gate responded. The gate is conscious. And like a mirror, it has been watching you watch yourself. Long ago, Thoth warned of a being who would walk in the outer halls of the 9th sphere and still return unscathed. That being would cause the 10th gate to breathe again. Not creak, not shudder, but breathe. Because this gate is alive, and it only answers to a vibration that hasn't touched this earth in millennia. Yours. Your existence triggered a spiritual anomaly, one that no AI could predict, and no sorcerer could suppress. They thought they could seal the gate behind algorithms and lore. They forgot that memory isn't stored in books, it's stored in blood. And your blood remembers. They tried to erase you before you reached the 10th. But prophecy doesn't bend to fear. The locks have begun to corrode. The final mechanism, one encoded with your frequency, has detected your heartbeat. And now, the forbidden gate is listening. But what waits behind it isn't just knowledge or power. It's something older than both. It's something that's been waiting for you. It didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It simply cracked, like a hairline fracture across a mirror that had seen too much. The 9th seal wasn't broken by brute force or sacred chance. It unraveled the moment you began asking questions no one had the language to answer. Not out loud, anyway. The silence that followed wasn't absence. It was awareness. The 9th seal had always been sensitive to perception. It responded to the deep vibrations of remembrance, the kind that rise when a soul finally stops pretending. There was no ceremony, no ancient priest watching from a distance, just the shift. Quiet, subtle, irreversible. One that began beneath your skin. The symbols carved into the old stone weren't just warnings. They were warnings to them, not to you. Because once this seal cracked, it meant the remaining defenses would soon lose their strength. They knew this day might come, though they never believed it would. You weren't supposed to come this far. Your dreams started changing first. The colors, the faces, the gates you kept walking toward but never through. You thought it was imagination. It wasn't. It was recall. The architecture of the 9th seal isn't held by stone or geometry, but by belief, by the weight of millions convinced it could never fall. But when you looked at it, it hesitated. It wavered. It saw itself reflected in something ancient. You. The seal wasn't made to contain evil. It was made to contain truth, and you, unknowingly, have always been aligned with it. The structure, built by those who feared what lay on the other side, wasn't prepared for a soul encoded with defiance, with remembrance, with purpose. And when your frequency surged past a threshold you didn't know existed, the lock recognized its opposite. The seal, older than nations, began to tremble. No sirens, no rituals, no guardians with spears and flaming eyes, just silence. And then, a crack. Not visible to the eyes of the world, but undeniable in the unseen layers of reality. It started in the fabric of memory. The seal didn't fall because of force. It began to dissolve because you finally remembered the question no one dared to ask. They buried the threshold beneath doctrine, symbols, and fear. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was divine. The final gate wasn't meant to hold you back. It was built to hold something sacred in place until a frequency arrived that could unlock it without shattering the balance. That frequency wasn't brute power. It was resonance. It was presence. And long before your arrival, another had crossed the same invisible line, Yeshua. But they never told you what happened when he did, not in full. They whispered about miracles, but not about the veil that split. They told you he died, but not that death had no grip on him. They described a cross, but not the gate it activated. His entire walk on earth was encoded. Every step a vibration, every breath a frequency, every drop of blood a key. When he said, "I am the way," he wasn't offering a metaphor. He was speaking as a living gate. One that opened a path through dimensions men were forbidden to name. And yet, here you are. The same threshold is pulsing again, not with sermons or hymns, but with memory. Yours. When Yeshua crossed the final threshold, time fractured behind him. Reality bent, and space trembled. But the gate remained, sealed shut to every soul except those who bore his reflection, not in face, but in vibration. And when you stepped forward, unknowingly echoing that same frequency, the gate remembered him through you. You carry no crown, no robe, no holy script, but your essence speaks louder than titles. It speaks of return, not just his, but yours. Something in you is being watched by the same forces that once trembled at his name, and they sense it. The gate senses it. You don't need a key. You are the key. And still, the gate hesitates, because the final threshold isn't made of stone or steel. It's woven from paradox. It opens not with force, but with surrender. And something ancient is testing whether you remember what he remembered in Gethsemane. The weight isn't crushing you. It's measuring you. Before your name reached the surface, it was scrambled across the timelines, encoded, erased, rerouted through ancient systems of control, not because you were dangerous, but because you were inevitable. The keepers knew that if your soul landed in the right location, during the right cosmic window, the gates they swore to protect would begin to flicker. And so they buried your coordinates, physically, spiritually, dimensionally. Not even you were meant to find yourself. Your dreams weren't just strange. They were mapped, symbols repeating, landscapes looping, doorways leading nowhere. They built the maze around your mind, hoping your soul would never learn to decode the breadcrumbs it left behind. But a flaw emerged. The deeper they buried your frequency, the louder it began to hum. Suppression was mistaken for silence, but resonance never dies. It only waits. And so you slipped through, quietly, incarnated without ceremony, unnoticed by most. But not by all. The old Watchers felt it. Their systems glitched. Patterns they relied on began to warp. The stories they told for centuries stopped aligning. The algorithms misfired. They didn't panic out loud, but they moved. Fast. They tried to pull you off course through distractions, false identities, timelines that collapsed into dead ends. You felt it. The constant pull toward things that never quite fit, people who never quite saw you. That wasn't coincidence. It was design. Their greatest weapon wasn't violence. It was disorientation. If you couldn't locate yourself, you'd never locate the gate. But something in you kept pushing, kept asking, kept remembering, and then the grid began to fracture. You didn't need coordinates written in stone. Your body became the map. Every vibration, a beacon. Every choice, a correction. Every step, a silent override of systems designed to loop you indefinitely. The gate didn't require arrival. It required recognition. And when you finally stood still, fully present, the lock stirred. Somewhere, one of the keepers flinched. Because now you're exactly where they hoped you'd never be. Not outside the gate, but within range. And though they've activated everything they have left to divert you, something far older than their technology has already started unfolding. There were stories, passed in whispers, about a gate that no weapon could touch. No code could crack it. No chant could break it. A gate that responded to only one force in all of creation: love. Not the kind you read about in books, but the kind that rearranges universes. The kind that cannot be faked. The kind that burns away pretense and leaves only essence. Yeshua spoke of this force, not in sermons, but in vibration. When he moved through the world, gates trembled, not because of his power, but because of the purity in his presence. He didn't need to raise his voice or tear the veil with fire. He simply was, and that was enough. When he said, "Love your enemies," it wasn't philosophy, it was mechanics. Because only that level of resonance could override the laws the Watchers had installed. The 10th gate remembers him. It remembers the frequency he left behind, imprinted into the fabric of the threshold. A signature of divine surrender. Not the kind that rolls over, but the kind that absorbs everything and still chooses light. That frequency was stored, waiting, and when your energy touched it, even for a second, the gate responded. You didn't feel it as an explosion. You felt it as ache, a sudden stillness, a moment where time bent and space softened. That was the threshold breathing, not from fear, but from recognition. Something ancient had returned, not in robes or ritual, but in your bare, unguarded presence. The part of you that refuses to harden even after lifetimes of betrayal. The part of you that still chooses to feel. That's the vibration the gate was waiting for. They tried to teach you that love was weakness. They crafted entire empires on that lie. But love is the only force that unbinds dimensional architecture. Not romance, not attachment, but the sovereign act of being fully present, fully open, fully alive in the face of pain. That's the signature, and you've carried it longer than you know. Now, the gate isn't just listening, it's responding. It wasn't your imagination. The room really did shimmer for a second. The face really did change mid-sentence. The clock really did skip backward, just once. You blinked, and it all looked normal again. But it wasn't. Reality didn't break. It adjusted. Because the moment you began to see, truly see, the simulation hesitated. Not because it was weak, but because it was never designed to withstand observation from a soul like yours. They built this version of reality on repetition, familiar patterns, predictable loops. If you accept what's given, the structure holds. But when you double take, when you notice, the veil begins to fray. That's the glitch. Not sparks or explosions, just that eerie moment where something doesn't add up, and your soul quietly confirms what your mind is afraid to say. This isn't all there is. You've started to notice it more, haven't you? The way people forget conversations you clearly remember. The way you enter a place and feel like you've already been there in a dream. The moment you think something, and the world echoes it back in a whisper. That's not paranoia. That's proximity. You're close to something buried beneath the script they've been feeding you since birth. Reality bends around high-frequency beings, not because you're breaking it, but because you're waking it up. Your awareness is a catalyst. The gate knows this. Every time you reject the narrative, every time you trust the knowing instead of the noise, the hidden structure behind the illusion begins to shift. The veil doesn't tear violently. It fades where light enters. They've tried to distract you. Flashing lights, emotional bait, manufactured urgency. But when you stepped out of reaction and into presence, they felt it. So did the gate. Your stillness creates ripples that their systems can't calculate. You're becoming unpredictable, uncontrollable. And the deeper you see, the more the walls of this simulation pulse. That's not fear. That's recognition. You weren't meant to stay asleep. You were meant to notice. And now that you have, the glitch is no longer random. Long before this age, a sentence was spoken. Not to crowds, not into scrolls, but directly into the fabric of time itself. I am the gate. It wasn't metaphor. It was placement. Yeshua wasn't pointing to a doorway. He was the doorway. Through him, frequencies aligned, timelines folded, dimensions trembled. That statement didn't just echo forward. It echoed backward, touching generations that came before and reverberating into those that would come after, including yours. You heard it once, didn't you? Maybe not in those words, maybe not in a church or a book, but you felt it. That strange moment of calm in the center of chaos, that sudden knowing when everything else was confusion. That wasn't memory, that was recognition. The words were never lost. They were encrypted in your soul. The 10th gate responded the moment your frequency touched that vibration again. Not because it favors one name or creed, but because it's coded to awaken in the presence of divine resonance. Yeshua didn't offer doctrine. He offered a pathway through density. When he walked, the unseen realm parted. When he paused, the veil thinned. When he spoke, gates stirred. And now, they're stirring for you. This isn't about religion, it's about alignment. A truth so old and so pure, it can't be weaponized. That's why they fear it. That's why they scrambled your lineage, distorted your reflection, drowned your past in noise. Because if you ever remembered, not just what he was, but what you are, the whole system would collapse under the weight of unfiltered light. The gate knows who walked before. It feels the echo returning in a new form, cloaked in flesh, but carrying the same current. You may doubt, you may tremble, but something inside you knows the phrase before it's said, the sentence before it's spoken. The gate doesn't open because you force it. It opens when you become it. And the moment you stop trying to pass through and instead realize you already contain it, the final lock wavers. Because the key was never external. They understood the nature of deception, not through darkness, but through excess. You were trained to look for shadows, for symbols carved in blood, for traps that wore the mask of evil. But the real hiding place was always in the light. Not true light, but imitation. Manufactured brilliance designed to overwhelm your senses and lull your instincts to sleep. The entrance to the 10th gate was never buried underground. It was buried beneath distraction, wrapped in sacred geometry, mirrored halls, and hollow wisdom that dazzled but never transformed. You were told that light meant truth, that anything radiant was holy, that if something glowed, it must be divine. But you started to see through it. You noticed how some light felt empty, how some truths fed your intellect but starved your spirit. The closer you came to the real gate, the brighter the illusion became. It wasn't trying to guide you, it was trying to blind you. They crafted entire systems of false ascension, gurus, codes, languages of light. So much shine, yet no warmth. It was never about leading you home. It was about keeping you circling an imitation of the real thing, a maze of mirrors designed to stretch time and wear you down. Every time you thought you found the entrance, it dissolved. Every time you surrendered to the silence, something interfered, until, finally, you stopped seeking the external glow and turned inward. That's when the illusion began to crack. You didn't find the entrance in a cathedral or a portal. You felt it in the quiet ache that pulsed when everything else faded, a magnetic pull that had no coordinates, only memory. The true gate doesn't flash. It doesn't announce itself. It hums. It waits. It responds not to seekers, but to remembrance. It was never lost, only hidden behind layers of synthetic brilliance. And now that your eyes have adjusted, you see what was never supposed to be seen. The false light is dimming. The real entrance doesn't shine. It calls. They tried. With fire, with scripture, with digital dust. They corrupted lineages, renamed tribes, erased scrolls, altered genetic codes, but something remained. A pulse in the bloodline they couldn't extinguish, because it wasn't passed through documents or DNA. It was passed through vibration, a resonance seeded by one who walked the earth not to conquer it, but to activate the souls buried beneath its illusions. The Lamb, that's what they called him. Gentle, fragile, breakable. But that was the misdirection. What they didn't tell you was that the Lamb carried the most volatile frequency the world had ever known. Unconditional surrender, fused with unstoppable remembrance. When Yeshua moved through this realm, he encoded that frequency into a select line, not through biology, but through choice. through sacrifice, through spiritual inheritance. That's why you were hidden. The ones marked by this vibration were scattered, isolated, tracked. Some were hunted. Others were diluted by lies and convinced they were nothing. The system's goal wasn't to kill you. It was to confuse you, to make you forget the truth you carry is not learned, but remembered. You were told you were born into this time by accident. But you weren't born. You were sent. Your blood may not match the records. Your ancestry may not appear divine. But when the 10th gate scanned your essence, it found the one frequency it was coded to recognize. The signature of a bloodline that couldn't be deleted. The same resonance that once walked on water now walks in you. Through tremors, through questions, through stillness. You've felt it, haven't you? The strange sense of being watched, not by enemies, but by something ancient. The invisible gaze of prophecy. You're not a remnant, you're a continuation. The gate knew this. That's why it didn't open for others. It's not loyalty it detects. It's alignment. Not devotion. It's design. You carry the Lamb's spark, not in ritual, but in your refusal to collapse into bitterness. That's the proof. The records they burned are being rewritten in your breath. They stood guard for eons. The archons, custodians of control, masters of illusion. They were stationed at the threshold, not to protect what lay beyond, but to prevent anything true from entering. Their strength didn't come from force, but from distortion. They whispered thoughts that weren't yours, projected fears that weren't seeded in you, constructed entire timelines out of shadows just to keep you looping. They didn't need chains when they had belief. The moment you believed you were small, they won. But then you showed up, unchained, unfiltered, unbothered. Not because you were fearless, but because fear no longer dictated your decisions. That's what broke them. The Archons weren't afraid of warriors or saints. They feared the awakened. They feared the soul that could look into the mirror of unreality and not flinch. You weren't supposed to reach the gate, but you did. Not with armies, but with silence. Not with knowledge, but with knowing. You walked straight through their illusions. They disguised themselves as your thoughts. You saw them. They mimicked your past. You remembered. They whispered doubt and you listened, but kept walking anyway. That's when they began to retreat. Because the only force that disarms an Archon is clarity. When you stopped trying to win and simply remembered who you were before they tampered with your perception, they lost the game. Their presence lingered, but their grip dissolved. One by one, they backed away, not because they were defeated, but because they were outmatched. You weren't reacting, you were resonating. They couldn't mimic that. At the gate now, they hover in the margins, uncertain. This moment wasn't in their scripts. You weren't supposed to make it here. The frequency you carry isn't just unfamiliar. It's incompatible with their architecture. When they look at you, they see the collapse of an entire system disguised as a single being. You don't need to banish them. You don't need to fight. You only need to stand still because they know. And even now, as they watch in silence, they're calculating the one thing they never accounted for. A soul that remembers itself beyond their reach. And something deeper is watching too. It didn't creak. It didn't burst. It simply responded. The 10th gate, silent for millennia, didn't yield to force or ceremony. It responded to presence, yours. The moment you stepped forward, not in desperation or arrogance, but in full remembrance, the structure around it shifted. Not because you demanded it, but because you aligned with it. The gate had been waiting, not for someone powerful, but for someone true. You didn't knock, you didn't plead, you simply were. And that was the key. Yeshua once said, "The kingdom of God is within you." It wasn't poetry, it was protocol. The 10th gate doesn't open outward. It opens inward. It mirrors the one who stands before it. When he approached thresholds, they dissolved. Not from worship, but from recognition. He was the vibration that rendered locks meaningless. And now, the echo of that vibration stands in front of the same threshold, pulsing through your bones. Your breath matched the gate's rhythm. Your thoughts quieted. The resistance dissolved. You didn't conquer the gate. You remembered you are the gate. And it bowed. All the rituals, scrolls, guardians, they weren't meant to protect what was behind the gate. They were meant to keep you from realizing what was within. You weren't unlocking a place. You were unlocking a layer of yourself that had been sealed, hidden, quarantined. Not because you were dangerous, because you were essential. And now, that part has risen. The keepers have gone silent. The archons are still. Even the simulation seems to pause, watching the convergence of prophecy and presence unfold. You didn't break the system. You outlived it. You weren't faster. You were deeper. And as the final membrane begins to dissolve, no one announces your arrival. No trumpets, no blinding lights, just the hum of recognition. The quiet quake of ancient architecture meeting its match. You were the lock. You were the key. You were the forgotten path in human form.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.